Let me tell you a story about how my life turned upside down in the most unexpected way. It all started when I moved into Willow Ridge Estates. This place was supposed to be my dream home, a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets, perfectly trimmed lawns, and friendly neighbors waving hello as they walked their dogs. My husband, Mark, loved it too. He said it felt like stepping into one of those TV commercials where everything is perfect. Our daughter, Lily, adjusted quickly, making friends with kids from down the block. For the first time in years, we felt like we belonged somewhere. But perfection often comes at a price, and Willow Ridge had its own set of rules. On the day we signed the papers, we were handed a thick booklet called the HOA Guidelines. At first glance, it seemed harmless. Rules about keeping your lawn green, not parking trucks on the street overnight, or avoiding loud noises after 9 p.m. back then. I skimmed through it without giving it much thought. After all, these rules were meant to keep things nice, right? Mark joked that following them would be easy, since we weren't exactly party animals anyway. Everything changed 6 months later. That's when the letters started arriving. Thin white envelopes slipped under our door, each containing formal notices from the Homeowners Association, HOA. The first one accused us of excessive noise during a family barbecue. Excessive noise. We hadn't even played music that night. Just laughter, clinking glasses, and the sizzle of burgers on the grill. But apparently, someone complained, and now we were officially on their radar. The second letter came soon after, citing an issue with our landscaping. Apparently, the rose bushes near our mailbox were overhanging onto communal property by half an inch. Half an inch. Who measures such things? And why does it matter so much? Each new complaint brought fines, small amounts individually, but adding up fast. It wasn't just about money, though. It was the constant feeling of being watched, judged, and criticized for every little thing. What bothered me most was how people treated us differently after the letters began. Neighbors who used to smile warmly now avoided eye contact. A woman walking her dog crossed the street rather than passing our house. Even Gary, the HOA president, gave me cold stares whenever I ran into him. His presence made my skin crawl. Something about his smug expression told me this wasn't just about maintaining standards, it was personal. One evening, while sitting on the porch watching the sunset, I realized something unsettling. These rules weren't there to protect the neighborhood. They were tools, weapons, even, to control us. Every violation notice felt like another brick added to a wall slowly closing in around us. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but what could I say? That I didn't want to live in a place where beauty mattered more than kindness, where conformity trumped individuality. That's when I met Rachel. She lived 3 doors down and had been quietly battling the HOA for years. One afternoon, she invited me over for coffee. As we sat in her cozy kitchen, she shared stories about other families who'd faced similar struggles. Some had packed up and left because they couldn't afford the mounting fines. Others stayed but lost their spirit, becoming shadows of themselves. Rachel leaned closer, her voice low but urgent. "You can't win against them," she said, "not unless you're willing to fight back." Her words stuck with me long after I left her house. Fight back? Against my own neighbors. The idea sounded absurd, but also strangely empowering. Deep down, I knew one thing. I couldn't let them take away what we'd worked so hard to build. Not without a fight. The tension in our household grew thicker with each passing day. Mark tried to stay optimistic, brushing off the HOA's complaints as minor annoyances. "They're just being picky," he'd say whenever another letter arrived. But I could see the frustration building behind his calm exterior. He spent hours on the phone with the HOA office, trying to reason with them, only to be met with robotic responses and vague promises of reviewing the case. It was like talking to a brick wall. For me, the stress manifested differently. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone was watching us. Every knock at the door sent my heart racing. Was it another warning? Another fine? Or worse, Had they decided we were too much trouble and wanted us gone for good? Even simple tasks like watering the plants or taking out the trash felt like potential minefields. One wrong move, and we'd be hit with yet another violation. Things escalated quickly after the landscaping incident. The HOA sent a crew to trim our roses without permission, leaving ugly stubs where vibrant blooms once stood. When I confronted them, they claimed it was necessary maintenance to comply with community standards. Necessary. Those roses had been a gift from Mark on our 5th anniversary. Seeing them butchered felt like a punch to the gut. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. Why were they targeting us? What had we done to deserve this? And then it hit me, the barbecue, the noise complaint, the roses. None of it was random. This wasn't about rules or aesthetics. It was about power. They wanted us to feel small, powerless, unwelcome, and it was working. Desperate for answers, I turned to Rachel again. She listened patiently as I vented, nodding knowingly when I mentioned the rose bushes. "Oh, they've done worse," she said matter-of-factly. "Last year, they accused Sarah down the street of having unsafe patio furniture. Turns out, her husband filed a complaint about the HOA fees. Coincidence? I don't think so." Rachel handed me a folder stuffed with papers, emails, memos, anonymous tips, all pointing to a pattern of harassment. Families who questioned the HOA's decisions or pushed back against their authority became targets. Fines piled up until they couldn't afford to stay. Some moved out quietly, too embarrassed to admit defeat. Others left angry, vowing never to return. Either way, the result was the same. Fewer voices of dissent, more control for Gary and his cronies. As I flipped through the documents, a chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just unfair, it was calculated. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a larger strategy to maintain dominance. And now, we were caught in their crosshairs. Mark noticed the change in me immediately. Gone was the hesitation, replaced by a steely determination. We can't let them win. I told him one evening as we sat at the kitchen table. If we give in, what message does that send? That we're okay with being bullied. That we'll roll over and play by their ridiculous rules. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know you're right," he admitted. "But fighting them won't be easy. They have money, influence, lawyers. What do we have?" "We have the truth," I replied firmly. "And we have nothing to lose." Rachel agreed to help us gather evidence. She introduced us to other neighbors who'd faced similar battles, forming a loose coalition of resistance. Together, we started documenting every interaction with the HOA, every letter, every call, every suspicious activity. We took photos of workers trespassing on properties, recorded conversations, and kept meticulous notes. Slowly but surely, a picture began to emerge, a web of corruption, intimidation, and abuse of power. One afternoon, while sorting through the files, I stumbled upon something shocking. A receipt for industrial-grade chemicals purchased under the HOA's name. At first glance, it seemed innocuous, a routine expense for pool maintenance or pest control. But something about it nagged at me. Why would they need such strong substances? And why hadn't anyone mentioned it before? I shared my discovery with Rachel, who raised an eyebrow. "Water contamination," she muttered thoughtfully. "It's happened before. Remember Tom's well last summer? Suddenly, his water smelled funny, and he had to pay thousands to fix it. Turns out, someone tampered with his system." My stomach churned as the pieces fell into place. Could it be possible? Had the HOA gone so far as to sabotage our water supply? The metallic taste, Lily's stomach aches, Mark's nausea. It all made sense now. If true, this wasn't just harassment. It was criminal. That night, I stared out the window at the darkened streets of Willow Ridge, feeling a mix of anger and fear. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting our home. The next morning, I woke up with a plan forming in my mind. It wasn't fully fleshed out yet, but one thing was clear. We needed proof. Accusing the HOA of contaminating our water without evidence would make us look reckless, or worse, paranoid. No, we had to approach this carefully, methodically. The stakes were too high to rush into anything. Mark wasn't thrilled when I told him what I had in mind. "You want to investigate them?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Do you even know how dangerous that could be?" "I don't care," I shot back, my tone sharper than I intended. "Lily got sick because of them. We're not just going to sit here and pretend everything's fine." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, but let's at least think this through. What exactly are you planning to do?" I explained it step by step. First, I'd start monitoring the reservoir, the main water source for Willow Ridge. If someone was tampering with it, they'd have to access it somehow. Second, I'd document every suspicious activity, strange vehicles parked nearby, workers lingering after hours, anything unusual. Third, I'd dig deeper into the HOA's finances, looking for clues about those chemical purchases Rachel had mentioned. It wasn't foolproof, but it was a start. Rachel offered to help, lending me a flashlight and a pair of binoculars she kept for birdwatching. "Be careful," she warned before I left. "These people play dirty. Don't underestimate them." That night, armed with my tools and a notebook, I began my stakeout. I positioned myself behind a cluster of bushes near the reservoir, hidden from view, but close enough to see what was happening. The air was cold, and the ground damp beneath me, but adrenaline kept me alert. Hours passed without incident, just the occasional rustle of leaves and distant hum of crickets. Just as I started doubting whether I was wasting my time, headlights pierced the darkness. A van pulled up slowly, its engine idling as two figures stepped out. One was Carl, the HOA's maintenance supervisor, a man I recognized from community meetings. The other wore a hoodie, their face obscured. They unloaded several jugs from the back of the van and carried them toward the reservoir. My heart raced as I watched them unscrew the caps and pour the contents inside. The liquid shimmered faintly under the moonlight, sending a chill down my spine. Shaking, I reached for my phone and started recording. Every movement, every sound. I captured it all. When they finished, they packed up quickly and drove away. I waited until the taillights disappeared before slipping out of my hiding spot. My legs felt like jelly as I crept closer to the reservoir, peering at the jugs they'd left behind. A label caught my eye: industrial cleaner, hazardous waste. My stomach churned. This wasn't routine maintenance, it was sabotage. Back home, I replayed the video footage over and over, memorizing every detail. Then I cross-referenced the van's license plate number online. To my astonishment, it belonged to a shell company linked directly to Gary Peterson, the HOA president. The connection was undeniable now. Gary wasn't just complicit, he was orchestrating the entire operation. Over the next few days, I pieced together more evidence. Financial records showed multiple purchases of the same chemicals, always paid for using HOA funds. Emails revealed cryptic messages between Gary and Carl, discussing property compliance and disciplinary measures. Each new discovery fueled my anger, but also strengthened my resolve. We weren't dealing with minor infractions anymore. This was deliberate, calculated harm, and we had the proof to expose it. When I showed everything to Mark, he was speechless. For a long moment, he simply stared at the screen, his jaw clenched tight. Finally, he spoke. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "If we go public with this, it'll blow up. Are you ready for that?" I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly. "We don't have a choice. They've crossed a line, Mark. They've hurt our family. If we stay silent, who's to say they won't do it again, to someone else?" He didn't argue. Instead, he wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "Then we fight," he whispered. "Together." And so, the real battle began. With the evidence in hand, we prepared to take on the HOA, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who'd been silenced, intimidated, or driven out. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a much larger storm. With the evidence in hand, I felt a mix of triumph and dread. We finally had proof of what the HOA was doing, proof that could bring them down. But knowing something and acting on it are two very different things. Every step forward felt like walking on thin ice, unsure if it would crack beneath us. Still, there was no turning back now. The first thing we did was call a meeting with our small group of allies. Rachel, Mark, and I gathered at her house late one evening, spreading out all the documents, photos, and videos on her dining table. The room buzzed with nervous energy as everyone leaned in to examine the materials. When I played the video of Carl dumping chemicals into the reservoir, the air went still. You could hear a pin drop. "This is insane," whispered Sarah, one of the neighbors who joined us after hearing about our efforts. "They're not just breaking rules, they're endangering lives." "Exactly," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "And if we don't do something, they'll keep getting away with it. But what exactly should we do?" That was the million-dollar question. Some suggested going straight to the police, while others worried about retaliation. Gary had eyes and ears everywhere. Word could get back to him before we even made a move. Rachel pointed out that filing a formal complaint might not be enough. We needed to make sure people couldn't ignore this. "We need to hit them where it hurts," she said firmly. "Their reputation." That's when the idea came to me. It wasn't planned or polished. It just popped into my head like a spark. What if we gave the HOA a taste of their own medicine? Something so outrageous, so undeniable, that they couldn't sweep it under the rug. Something symbolic yet hard-hitting. My mind raced as I thought it through. And then I blurted it out. "What if we dumped Manure in their office?" Silence followed. Then, slowly, Rachel started laughing. "Are you serious?" she asked between giggles. "That's brilliant." Mark wasn't convinced. "This is crazy," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're talking about escalating this to a whole new level. Do you realize how much attention that will draw?" "Yes," I replied, locking eyes with him. "That's the point. If they think they can poison our water and ruin lives without consequences, let's show them what real disruption looks like. Trust me, no one will forget this." Rachel jumped on board immediately, offering to help source the manure. She knew someone with a horse farm nearby who owed her a favor. By the next morning, we had 47 bags of fresh, pungent manure stacked neatly in the back of my pickup truck. The smell alone was almost unbearable, but every time I gagged, I reminded myself why we were doing this. This wasn't vandalism, it was justice. Planning the operation took precision. We chose a night when the HOA office would be empty, a Tuesday based on their schedule, and scoped out the building beforehand. Tucked away behind the clubhouse, it was isolated enough that we wouldn't attract unwanted attention. Rachel suggested bringing gloves, masks, and bolt cutters to disable the lock quietly. We also agreed to clean up any traces of our presence afterward, leaving nothing behind that could connect us to the deed. As the day approached, nerves set in. What if we got caught? What if someone recognized us? I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message. About standing up for ourselves and everyone else they'd bullied. If we succeeded, it could change everything. The night of the operation, I barely slept. Mark tried to talk me out of it again, but I could tell he understood deep down why I needed to see this through. As we drove to the HOA office under cover of darkness, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Adrenaline coursed through me, sharpening my senses. This was it, the moment of truth. When we arrived, the area was eerily quiet. Rachel kept watch while I worked on the lock, my heart pounding in my chest. Once inside, we moved quickly, emptying bag after bag onto desks, chairs, carpets, and filing cabinets. The stench was overwhelming, but none of us hesitated. By the time we finished, The entire office looked like a scene from a nightmare. Before leaving, I placed a single note on Gary's desk. Asterisk next time. Try poisoning something besides innocent families. Asterisk. As we drove away, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The HOA would never see us coming. The next morning, chaos erupted in Willow Ridge. News of the Manure incident spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors gathered outside the HOA office, gagging at the stench and snapping photos with their phones. Some looked horrified, others amused, but everyone was talking about it. The smell was so overpowering that even people living blocks away could detect it wafting through the air. It was impossible to ignore. Gary Peterson arrived shortly after, his face turning an alarming shade of red as he took in the scene. He stormed into the building, only to emerge moments later clutching a handkerchief over his nose, sputtering curses under his breath. Reporters showed up soon afterward, eager to document the scandal. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved into faces, and questions flew from every direction. For once, Gary, the man who always seemed untouchable, looked completely out of control. That's when I made my move. I had spent the night preparing for this moment, organizing all our evidence into a neat presentation. Armed with printed copies of the chemical receipts, emails between Gary and Carl, and the damning video footage, I walked straight into the crowd outside the office. Mark stayed behind, watching Lily, while Rachel stood nearby ready to support me if things went south. My heart raced as I approached Gary, who was busy deflecting questions from reporters. "Funny how you're so concerned about cleanliness now," I said loudly, cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to look at me, including Gary. His eyes narrowed, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. "Considering you poisoned our water supply last month." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gary's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. I held up the folder in my hands and waved it for everyone to see. "We have proof," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Videos, documents, financial records, all showing exactly what you've been doing. Tampering with the water, targeting families, using HOA funds for illegal activities. You thought you could get away with it, but you underestimated us." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then murmurs broke out among the neighbors. People exchanged glances, some nodding slowly as if pieces of a puzzle were finally clicking into place. Sarah stepped forward, holding up her phone. "She's telling the truth," she announced. I saw the video myself. Gary tried to regain composure, stammering denials, and accusing me of fabricating lies. But his words fell flat against the weight of the evidence. One by one, other neighbors spoke up, sharing their own stories of harassment and intimidation. A man named Tom recounted how his well water had mysteriously turned foul last summer. Another woman described being fined repeatedly until she couldn't afford to pay her mortgage anymore. Each story added fuel to the fire, turning public opinion firmly against the HOA. By noon, local authorities had launched an investigation. Carl, the maintenance supervisor, cracked under questioning and confessed everything, implicating Gary in exchange for immunity. According to Carl, Gary had orchestrated the entire scheme to drive out problematic homeowners, those who dared question his authority or refused to follow his rules blindly. The chemicals weren't just meant to intimidate. They were intended to force people to leave without a fight. As the day wore on, the HOA's reputation crumbled. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting details of the corruption far beyond Willow Ridge. Calls poured in from neighboring communities, outraged residents demanding accountability. By evening, Gary had resigned in disgrace, leaving behind a power vacuum that would take months to sort out. Standing amidst the commotion, I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Relief because we'd exposed the truth and stopped them from hurting anyone else. Disbelief because we'd actually pulled it off. Mark called later that night, his voice filled with pride. "You did it," he said simply. "You stood up to them, and you won." But deep down, I knew this wasn't just my victory. It belonged to everyone who'd been silenced, pushed aside, or driven out. Together, we had taken back our neighborhood. And as I watched the sun set over Willow Ridge, I allowed myself a small smile. Justice might not always be pretty, but sometimes it smells like manure, and that's okay. In the days that followed, Willow Ridge transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The downfall of Gary Peterson and the dissolution of the HOA sent shockwaves through the community, leaving behind a mix of relief, anger, and cautious optimism. For so long, fear had ruled this place. Fear of fines, fear of retaliation, fear of standing out. Now that grip was loosened, and people were finally free to speak their minds. Neighbors who had once avoided each other began reconnecting. Front doors opened more often, and conversations flowed freely over fences. Some residents even organized impromptu gatherings to discuss what came next. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were still disagreements about how to move forward. But for the first time, those discussions felt honest and collaborative rather than forced or manipulated. Rachel became an unofficial leader of sorts, helping coordinate efforts to rebuild trust within the community. She spearheaded a committee to draft new guidelines, ones focused on fairness and transparency instead of control. No more ridiculous rules, she declared at one meeting. We're here to live, not tiptoe around someone else's idea of perfection. Mark and I threw ourselves into the process too, attending meetings and offering suggestions. Lily loved seeing me more involved. She'd proudly tell her friends at school, "My mom saved the neighborhood," while I laughed it off. There was a kernel of truth in her words. This fight hadn't just been about our family. It had been about reclaiming something bigger, a sense of belonging. As news of the scandal spread, former residents started reaching out. Families who had been driven away by relentless fines or harassment expressed interest in returning. One couple, the Millers, moved back within weeks, tears in their eyes as they hugged Rachel and thanked her for standing up when they couldn't. Their homecoming felt like a victory not just for them, but for everyone who believed Willow Ridge deserved better. The physical changes were noticeable too. Gone were the sterile, cookie-cutter aesthetics enforced by the old HOA. Instead, creativity blossomed. Someone painted a mural on the side of the clubhouse depicting trees, birds, and smiling children holding hands. Another neighbor installed wind chimes in their yard, their soothing melodies drifting through the air. Even the reservoir area, once off-limits and shrouded in secrecy, was cleaned up and turned into a small park with benches and walking paths. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were lingering tensions, especially among those who had supported Gary or benefited from his regime. A few holdouts grumbled about the lack of standards or muttered darkly about chaos taking over. But most people ignored them, choosing instead to focus on building something positive together. For me, the biggest change was internal. I no longer felt like an outsider looking in. Willow Ridge was my home now, not because of its manicured lawns or picturesque streets, but because of the people who lived here. People willing to stand up for each other, flaws and all. The weight I'd carried for so long, the constant worry, the frustration, the anger, finally lifted. In its place was a quiet confidence. If we could survive this storm, we could handle anything. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he reached over and took my hand. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I used to think moving here was a mistake. All those rules, all that drama. But now, I'm glad we stayed." "Me too," I replied, squeezing his hand. "This isn't just a house anymore. It's a home." And it was true. Despite everything, or maybe because of it, Willow Ridge had become exactly what I'd hoped for when we first arrived. A place where laughter echoed louder than complaints, where kindness mattered more than conformity, and where families like ours could truly belong. But as peaceful as life felt now, I couldn't help glancing occasionally at the empty HOA office down the street. Part of me wondered if anyone would ever figure out who dumped the manure. Not that I plan to confess anytime soon. After all, some secrets are better left buried. And this one? Well, let's just say it smelled like justice. Months passed, and Willow Ridge continued to heal. The scars left by the HOA's reign were still visible in some ways. Empty houses waiting for new owners, overgrown lawns where families had once thrived. But the neighborhood was slowly coming back to life. What amazed me most was how resilient people could be when given the chance. Freed from the shadow of fear, they blossomed in unexpected ways. The community meetings became a regular part of our routine. At first, I worried they'd devolve into arguments or power struggles, but something beautiful happened instead. Real collaboration. Neighbors listened to each other, shared ideas, and worked together to create solutions that benefited everyone. Even small gestures, like organizing weekend cleanups or hosting potluck dinners, brought us closer. For the first time, Willow Ridge felt less like a gated fortress and more like a true neighborhood, a patchwork of different personalities, quirks, and dreams stitched together by shared experiences. Lily adapted quickly to the changes. Her circle of friends grew as kids who had moved away started trickling back. One afternoon, while helping her set up a lemonade stand near the newly renovated park, I overheard her explaining the story of the manure incident to a group of wide-eyed children. It was epic, she said with dramatic flair, waving her arms for emphasis. They deserved it. While I cringed slightly at her enthusiasm, I couldn't help but smile. To her, it wasn't just a tale of rebellion. It was proof that standing up for yourself mattered. Mark also seemed lighter these days. Gone was the tension that used to creep into his shoulders whenever we received an HOA letter. Instead, he volunteered to coach Lily's soccer team and joined a book club, something I never thought I'd see. On weekends, he spent hours tinkering in the garage, building birdhouses and painting them bright colors. What? He joked when I teased him. We're allowed to have fun now. As for me, I found joy in the little things. Morning walks without feeling watched, lazy afternoons gardening without worrying about fines, and evenings spent chatting with neighbors under strings of twinkling lights someone had hung across the cul-de-sac. Life wasn't perfect, it rarely is, but it was good, really good. Still, there were moments when the past lingered. Late at night, lying awake beside Mark, I'd replay everything in my mind. The water contamination, the sleepless nights, the decision to dump manure in the HOA office. Had it been too extreme? Too risky? But then I'd think about Gary's smug face, Carl sneaking around the reservoir, and Lily sick in bed. And I knew the answer. Sometimes you have to take a stand, even if it means getting your hands dirty. One crisp autumn evening, Rachel invited us over for dinner to celebrate 6 months since the scandal broke. Her dining table was piled high with casseroles, pies, and bottles of wine. As we sat around swapping stories and laughing until our sides hurt, she raised her glass for a toast. To Willow Ridge, she said, her voice warm with pride. And to all of us for proving that kindness beats control every single time. Everyone cheered, clinking glasses and grinning. For a moment, I let myself soak it all in. The laughter, the camaraderie, the sense of belonging. This wasn't just a victory against the HOA. It was a reminder that communities are built not by rules but by relationships, by trust, by love. Later that night, as Mark and I walked home hand in hand, I glanced at the old HOA office one last time. It stood dark and empty, its windows boarded up, a relic of a chapter none of us wanted to revisit. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the truth might eventually come out, that someone would piece together the clues and figure out who had orchestrated the manure incident. But honestly, I didn't care. Let them try. Because what we'd done wasn't just an act of defiance. It was an act of hope. And as long as Willow Ridge remained a place where hope could grow, I knew we'd be okay.